Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session Cybersecurity Resilience, the Key to Critical Infrastructure Protection. I am Reenal Vikeria, and I'll be your host for the day. Before we get started, we would like to go over a few house rules for our attendees. The session will be in listen only mode and will last for an hour, out of which the last 10 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A. If you have any questions for the organizers or our speaker during the webinar, please use the Q&A window. Also, if you face any audio video challenges, please check your internet connection or you may log out and log in again. Moving on, we have an important announcement for our audience. We have initiated CPE credit certificate for our participants, and to qualify for one, attendee needs to attend the entire live webinar and then send an email to cybertalks@ecouncil.org, after which our team will verify your attendance and issue the CPE certificate. Also, we would like to announce to our audience about the special handouts. Take the screenshot of the running webinar and post in your social media handle of LinkedIn or Twitter, tagging EC Council and using hashtag CyberTalks. We will share free handouts to first 10 audience. As a commitment to close the cybersecurity workforce gap by creating multi-domain cybersecurity technicians, EC Council has pledged $3.5 million towards CCT education and certification scholarship to certify approximately 10,000 cyber professionals ready to contribute to the industry.
Did you know that you can be part of the lucrative cybersecurity industry? Even top companies like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, IBM, Facebook, and Dell all hire cybersecurity professionals. The cybersecurity industry has a 0% unemployment rate. The average salary for an entry-level cybersecurity job is about $100,000 per year in the United States. Furthermore, you don't need to know coding and learn from your home, and you get a scholarship to kickstart your career. Apply now. EC Council is pledging a $3.5 million CCT scholarship for cybersecurity career starters. Scan the QR code on the screen to apply for the scholarship. Fill out the form.
If you want to know more about CCT scholarship, kindly visit our website given in the chat section. Our speaker for today's session is Mathieu Gorge. Mathieu Gorge is a global data security, information governance, and compliance subject matter expert with 20 plus years of experience. An award-winning CEO for innovation, excellence, and security and compliance expertise, Mathieu has dedicated himself to helping CEOs, CXOs, and the board of directors manage cyber accountability, challenges, and focus on opportunities that good cyber hygiene and proactive cybersecurity compliance programs can bring to the firms. Mathieu created the multi-award winning 5 Pillars of Security framework aimed at providing CEOs, CXOs, and boards with a timeless, industry agnostic, and jargon free cyber accountability methodology. In 2021, the French government awarded Mathieu the rank of Knight of the National Order of Merit. Without any further delay, I would now hand over the session to our speaker, Mathieu.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone, wherever you are today. So as you just heard, my name is Mathieu Gorge. I'm the founder and CEO of VigiTrust. I'm going to take the next 35 minutes or so to share my views on cybersecurity and how to build resilience. Unfortunately, I have a slight issue with my camera whilst I present, so I will switch off my camera for now, and I will get back on it for the Q&A. And if you've got any questions, don't be shy, just send them. I'll be happy to answer any question I can answer. And if there are questions that I don't have time to answer, I'm sure I can get those questions and get back to you. So let me just share my screen for a second. So just by way of introduction, I'm Mathieu Gorge. I'm the founder and CEO of VigiTrust. As you just heard, I have been in cybersecurity and in security and privacy for probably about 25 years now. I'm very lucky that I've been recognized by my peers as influential person in the industry. I actually won a Lifetime Achievement Award from ISSA last summer, and I'm also the author of a book called The Cyber Elephant in the Boardroom, which was published by Forbes and was #1 best-selling on Amazon. and it's all about translating cyber risk into a business risk for the board and for key decision makers. And so I'm going to talk about those topics throughout my presentation, and try and provide you with some advice as to what you need to know with regards to cybersecurity career. I just want to bounce back on the video that you just saw. There are so many opportunities in cyber right now, and if you've got the right knowledge, it's a great industry to be in. As I said, I've been in it 25 years. There's not a day that goes by where I don't learn something new. It's always super exciting. So the key topics that we're going to talk about today: the first one, the importance of cybersecurity resilience for business. Then how to establish a framework for holistic cybersecurity resilience. Then the elements of a program for resilience, and then the need for proactive defense against cyber threats. And I'm going to talk about all of those different topics, not in that exact order. It's going to be a bit of a mix and match, but I'm going to cover all of them. Before I move on, I do have a disclaimer that the views that I'm sharing today are my views and not the views of VG Trust or the VG Trust Global Advisory Board that I'll probably mention at some stage. Some of the topics are probably interesting topics where people will have different opinions. And so, as you can hear from my accent, I'm French and I'm a man, so it's very likely that at some stage I'm going to say something wrong, so bear with me. I want to start by talking about my views on privacy, because you can't be in cybersecurity or in compliance and not understand that different people have different opinions about what is private and what isn't. So if I look at my life, what you see on the screen right now is a picture of me when I was probably 4 and my sister was 6.5, and we were in the south of France. And back then, the parents would just sit down and have a bottle of wine and just let the kids roam until their food was ready, go back and hope that the kids would still be there. And that was the 1980s, and that's what happened back then. And today you wouldn't do that. So culture and family will always have an impact on how you deal with privacy and how you deal with devices that have access to private data. This is a picture of me in my last year at primary school in France, and we were extremely lucky that we had one of the first labs for computers. And for those of you that are old enough to remember that, we had some Thomson MO5 and TO7, and at the time it was state of the art. There was no concept of privacy either. Anybody could use anybody's computer. Then that's a picture of me when I graduated from the University of Ulster in Northern Ireland. And that university was the one that had the most computer labs in the whole of the UK. And it was interesting because they already had about 200 to 300 computers hooked up to the internet. Again, anybody could use them. There was no concept of privacy, no concept of anything in terms of compliance. It was just like a free-for-all. And so you can see that I was born in a world without cell phones. I was born in a world where there was no internet. My kids, however, have never seen a world without cell phones and the internet. They just can't comprehend it. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is that when you get into your cybersecurity career, if you want to build a culture of security, if you want to build good hygiene, good cyber hygiene, you're going to have a mix of people that have never had a world without the internet and connections, and people that are probably, in their last job going into retirement with completely different aspects of privacy. And so it's important to keep that in mind. Now, we wanted to talk about critical infrastructure considerations. And I think it's always important to go back to basics. So what is critical infrastructure? Critical infrastructure is all the infrastructure that allows us to have the way of life that we have today. So let me give you a few examples. Access to water, access to health and to hospital, access to food, access to banking and financial services, access to power and energy, access to protection through police and the military, access to transportation, planes, airports, trains, motorways, and so on, and then communication. And generally speaking, when we talk about critical infrastructure, we believe that it's a given, and it's always there, and it will always be there. We also believe that it's actually managed by governments, when in reality, depending on which study you look at, it's anywhere between 80 and 90%, depending on the country, of the critical infrastructure is actually either owned and or managed by the commercial sector. So would-be terrorists and attackers are always looking for ways to exploit the gaps. And what you see on the right-hand side here is another vision of critical infrastructure in today's world, where everything is connected. So the city is connected, the roads are connected, the buildings are connected, all of the utilities are connected. And then when you go home, everything is also connected. So if you think about it, I would contend that all of you right now, you have at the very least two connected devices with you, probably an iPad or a laptop or a computer and a cell phone. Most of you probably have a connected watch. Some of you have a connected medical device. Others might have a connected whatever it is that you use on a daily basis. And that's what you carry with you at all times. So the attack surface is absolutely massive. And you need to protect it the right way at all times, whereas the hackers they only need to get it right once. And so there's a concept that I'd like you to go away with, which is the concept of personal critical infrastructure protection. So when you go home, if you've got a smart door, a smart HVAC system, air conditioning system, a smart fridge that will automatically send a request to your local supermarket to deliver when something is out. Anything that is in your house and that is connected is essentially a risk. And I was talking to a CISO yesterday who said to me, have you heard about the latest hack with connected hoovers, vacuum cleaners? So there's a vacuum cleaner that essentially learns your house and learns all of the different areas within your house so that it can automatically go and clean. But what it does actually do is it actually maps out your house. So now you know that Mathieu lives in a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom house. You know how many doors I have, you know how many windows. And most citizens, most private users are oblivious to that. So you're going to see a lot of opportunities come up in what I call personal critical infrastructure protection. Now I want to talk about global risks and what you need to know about. The World Economic Forum has been providing a global risks report for the last 13, 14 years. Every year they tend to get it right, except in 2022. So the report comes out, generally speaking, the first or second week in January, and it covers the types of risks. So climate risk, cybersecurity failure, digital inequality, financial services, extreme weather, whatever. And they also generally consider the prospect of war. In 2022, they didn't, and they got it wrong because the war started in February. That said, I'd still recommend looking at the World Economic Forum. Every year, the report is free, and it's a good kind of starting point to try and see where the risks might be in the next 12 to 18 months. This year in 2023, they came out with a new report called the Global Cybersecurity Outlook Report. And one of the messages that I'd like you to go away with today, if you're looking at a career in cyber and compliance, is that there's a lot of focus on geopolitical risks. If you look at the global cyber landscape in that table of contents here, the first risk is not emerging threats like AI. The first risk is geopolitical risk. And so I think it's important to understand what that is. And geopolitical risks, by and large, is the impact that a war situation or a country failing to pay its debts or an act of terrorism will have on the global connected systems and therefore on cybersecurity. And you can't today have a career in cyber without at least understanding the impact of geopolitical risks. So if I look at the executive summary of that report, it basically says that the attacks have changed from trying to damage your reputation to focusing on business disruption. So business disruption, a perfect example, two perfect examples of that. The first one is the health service executive in Ireland, which manages all of the hospitals, victim of a ransomware attack, and the whole hospital system went down for about 3 to 4 months, down to pen and paper. And in fairness to the Irish government, they actually refused to pay, which was probably the right decision. You should never really pay a ransomware because you never know if you're going to get the key to decrypt, and also you advertise yourself as people that pay. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you've got issues where critical infrastructure systems are being hacked, like the pipeline that was hacked, where they made a business decision to pay because it made more sense for them to pay, but yet they advertise themselves as people that will entertain a ransom, which is probably not the right place to be. So what we're seeing is we're seeing global geopolitical instability, and one thing that we do see, and I have no allegiance to that company, but they provide a great white paper on why cyber attacks are always a sign of a physical attack that might come. So they basically looked at the recent conflicts, and they looked at the buildup of cyber attacks against government sites, against financial services, against hospitals, and so on. And generally speaking, those tend to spike about 2 months before the physical attack, and about 2 to 3 weeks before the physical attacks, they nearly go down to zero. And once the physical attack happens, it goes back up. So that's why it's important to understand that. And it's a very fragmented area right now. Another thing that's important to remember is that the structured interactions between cyber and business leaders are becoming more frequent. What do we mean by that? So one of the key topics is to build a security culture in the organization. Now, how do you do this? You look at who's involved in cybersecurity, who's involved in pure risk, who's involved in asset management, who's involved in business impact of dealing with the risks. And the way I look at risks is I have 4 key areas of risk: strategic geopolitical risk that I already mentioned, financial, operational, and contractual risk, that's managing your third parties, your fourth parties, your contracts, your IP, and so on. Then comes the reputational and everything that has to do with your image. But as we saw from the report, the threats are moving more towards disruption rather than damage to reputation, although obviously the reputation is impacted. And then at the risk of offending the more technical people comes the cybersecurity technical area, where we already have very good vendors that can help. And it's interesting to, if you're new in cyber or if you're scaling up in cyber, to understand the latest technical advancements that we have in cyber. So when I started in cyber, first of all, it wasn't called cyber, it was called network security, then it became data security, then privacy, then compliance, then geopolitical risk, and so on and so on. But at the end of the day, we still have firewalls, we still have antivirus, we still have anti-phishing, but we've got new solutions around, primarily around authentication, around logging, around risk governance and compliance. And you don't need to be an expert at everything, but you kind of need to know a little bit of everything. in order to be able to have the right conversations within the organization. So that leads me on to the topic of cyber accountability within an organization. So I took the example of PCI DSS, which is the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standards. This is taken from the old version, the 3.2.1. Version 4.0 is now out and will be enacted in March 2024, so in 3 months' time, not even 3 months at this stage. But the reason why I use this is if you look on the left, you can see the roles and the teams, and it starts with executive sponsors, leaders, compliance managers, information security team, business unit managers, going down to audit, IT, third-party services, all the way down to external assessors. Why is this interesting? Well, it's interesting because most people would believe that compliance and cybersecurity is with IT, not even necessarily with compliance managers. And the reality is that you need to have people involved at board level. You need to have compliance people, information security people, CISO. It's an overall security virtual team that goes well beyond the team that's actually called information security. Now, generally speaking, when we talk about risk to the board or to key decision makers that are not technical or not legally minded, we talk about it in our own jargon. So we love 3-letter and 4-letter acronyms. We love PCI, we love ISO, we love NIST, we love CIS, and so on. But we do understand that non-technical people, especially financial people, will understand the value of an asset. So what we're going to tell them is we're going to say, hey, you know that group of assets that we have, those servers, those computers, those printers, whatever, they're part of an asset that is subject to a regulation, a standard called PCI DSS. So we're going to have to look at that scope, do a risk analysis, assign the threats and vulnerabilities to each asset, have a look at the concerns, have a look at the likelihood of risk or vulnerability being impacted or exploited, and then that will give us a residual risk. And at that stage, we're going to ask you for a lot of money to get that fixed. And that is the wrong approach. That is unfortunately still a very common approach. The right approach is to turn the discussion into a value-add discussion. So move from cybersecurity being a showstopper to cybersecurity being a business enabler to cybersecurity being on the financial statements. So there's a standard called the FAIR standard, FAIR, and the FAIR standard allows you to essentially put a value on assets primarily around risk and around cyber. And with that, what you do is you identify the IT assets and the non-technical assets that are 100% or 90% cybersecurity, as opposed to including them in generic IT. And so what that means is that you now put in a value, an asset value on your cybersecurity program and cybersecurity assets. You add a line in the financial statements. And once you add that line in the financial statements, the board has to look at it every time they meet. They can't pay lip service to it. They can't say, well, cyber is a subsection of IT, because the reality is cyber is a section in its own right. So important to understand that concept. Now, in the book that I wrote, the Cyber Elephant in the Boardroom, I came up with what I call the 5 stages of cyber grief. So imagine you work in cyber, you're a chief security officer or you're a compliance officer, and you go to the board and you say, hey, we need to have a discussion about cyber. Initially, you will most likely be faced with what we call denial. And the board will say to you, look, our value is really to build employment, it's to pay tax, it's to generate profits for shareholders. It's to grow the business. So don't bother me with cyber. Go and talk to somebody else. Then you come back and you say, hey, really, we need to talk about cyber. And then comes the anger stage. And the anger stage is, look, I've given you money to get training. I've given you money for firewalls. I've given you money for biometric authentication. I've given you money for policies and procedures. I've even hired a chief security officer. Go and talk to them. That is not my problem. Then comes the bargaining. And the bargaining stage is where they say, okay, I can see that my competitors in my industry are being hacked, or I can see that the regulator is knocking at their door. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hire a very reputable consulting firm that's going to come in and do a summary of what we are doing and most likely not doing, and create a 5 to 10 year plan to show that we are committed to doing something, but we're not doing it just yet. And that might be seen as a good start, but really it's not even the bare minimum. Then comes the depression stage. And the depression stage is, oh my God, we have been hacked. The regulator is in the lobby of our firm demanding to speak to the chairperson and the chief security officer. What do we do? And eventually comes the acceptance. And the acceptance is the idea that you've done probably 60% to 70% of what you're supposed to do, maybe not in a way that you can demonstrate compliance or a good faith in trying to comply with applicable standards and regulations, but you've been trying. And so what you need to do is you need to bridge that gap between the 60 or 70% and the 100%. And you need to do this by providing a plan that is no longer than 3 years. In my experience, if you have to talk to the data protection commissioner or the information commissioner's office, wherever you are, and you have a plan of action that's longer than 3 years, they won't believe you, because then it's just an aspiration. You actually don't really mean to do it. But it's a good way of getting started. You're like, this is what we've done. We know the pitfalls. We know what we need to do. And we are now committing to doing this over the next 3 years. The other thing I would say is that I often say that security is a journey and not a destination. You might be in compliance with PCI, with HIPAA, with GDPR at a particular point in time, but because the risk surface changes all the time. Remember, I was talking about the risk surface. So in your organization, maybe you acquired a business, maybe you sold a business, maybe you have a new application, maybe you've got a new cloud provider. It's a dynamic environment, and it's the same at home. Maybe you just decided that from now on, all of your equipment will be connected. Well, so it changes all the time. So you can't really rest on your laurels. Once you achieve some level of compliance, you need to put in place a process that allows you to achieve that resilience that we were talking about at the beginning of the webinar. So I came up with what I call the 5 pillars of security framework, which is a framework that's won a number of awards. And it's based on the idea that whether you want to comply with PCI, with HIPAA, with ISO, with NERC, with FERC, with NIS2, it doesn't really matter. You always go back to 5 common denominators: physical security, people security, data security, infrastructure security, which is your wider ecosystem. So your networks behind your firewalls, your remote workers, your hybrid workers, your applications, your cloud, your website, your intranet, your third parties, fourth parties, and then crisis management. What do you do when something goes wrong? And this is written in plain English, and I've tried to remove all of the technical and the legal jargon, and it's really aimed at providing technical people nearly with a translating tool to talk to non-technical people about cyber and compliance. So the way it works is that for each pillar, there's 2 versions of the framework. One that is strategic and one that is super strategic. So the super strategic one has 5 questions per pillar, and the strategic one has 12 questions per pillar. It drills down a little bit more into operational stuff. And the questions are asked in plain business English with an idea of trying to understand the business impact. So the questions sound a little bit like this. As a CEO or as a C-level board member, I am confident, sure, happy that everything is in place for, in this case, data security. And the answers are yes, absolutely. Yes, I think so. No, I don't think so. Absolutely not. And then we have what we call red flag questions. And they are trick questions. And the two answers are it doesn't apply to me or I don't care. And unfortunately, you would be surprised how many people answer it doesn't apply with no real reason why. They just think it doesn't apply, but it might. Or I don't care. I don't care because it's not my job. I'm still in denial. I'm still in the anger phase. And so out of this, you build a maturity model, and that maturity model allows you to continually train and retrain C-level board members. You can do this face to face. You can do this through e-learning. And by the way, the 5 pillars of security framework, it's available free of charge at vgtrust.com. All of the questions, and you can use it. We also have a free version of our software for board members. It's been very well received by C-level folks. So as I said, super strategic and strategic. And in the end, you get the red flags and you get the action items. And that allows you to build a very good base framework for operational security, risk, and compliance. And that needs to be an ongoing program. Remember, security is a journey, not a destination. And so I would highly recommend that if you're new to cyber or if you're scaling up and you want, you look at the 4,000 plus security regulations or data privacy laws and frameworks and so on out there, and you're like, where is there a common denominator that allows me to really learn everything I need to know to build a good program? The 5 pillars of security program is very simple and very easy to manage. So that brings me towards the end of my presentation. I suppose when you talk about critical infrastructure protection, you have to remember my 4 bubbles of risks: the geopolitical risks, the contractual financial risks, the reputational and image risks, and then the IT risks. And remember, what we're trying to protect as an industry is our way of life. I get up in the morning, I want shower. I want a hot shower. I want to be able to make a coffee. I want to be able to have food and so on. And I think that because everything is interconnected and the risk surface keeps growing and growing and growing, and it's going to continue to grow. Today you might have 25 connected devices in your home. Tomorrow you'll have 30, and in 3 years' time you might have 50. And you will probably forget to disconnect the ones that you don't use anymore. So it's an ongoing process. And one final thing would be that if you don't know where to start to understand security frameworks, go back to something super simple like the five pillars of security, and that will allow you to understand key concepts and the board as well. And the board, they deal with risk all the time. They deal with financial, HR, ESG, cyber. It's just that we're not necessarily explaining it in plain English and in business English, talking about the impact. So that's what we need to do as an industry. So that's me. Thank you, and thank you to the EC Council and Cyber Talks for the opportunity to talk today. I'm going to stop sharing and turn on my camera for the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for such an informative session, Matthew, and our attendees share the same sentiments. Before we begin with the Q&A part, I would like to inform all the attendees that EC Council Certified Cybersecurity Technician (CCT) is an entry-level certification program. This program provides multi-domain technical skills, 85 hands-on labs, has captured the flag exercises and performance-based exam. delivered on a live cyber range. CCT maps to many roles in the industry like IT support specialist, IT networking specialist, cybersecurity technician, network engineers, SOC analyst, IT managers, and anyone with a CCT certification is eligible for 3.5 million cybersecurity job vacancies in the world by 2025. So, if you're interested to learn more about our programs, do let us know in the poll that's going to be conducted now. Let us know your preferred mode of training and we will reach out to you. So, shall we start with the Q&A, Matthew?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. So, our first question, I'll put it in the chat box as well. So, our first question is, what role does cloud incident response play in critical infrastructure protection?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, the cloud adoption, there's a lot of companies that said they wouldn't go to cloud. They wanted to keep their data private on their own servers or at the very least on a private cloud. And what we're seeing now is more and more companies really putting everything in the cloud. And so if you put all of your data and your critical businesses and part of your critical infrastructure in the cloud, you're essentially entrusting third parties with with a key critical business activity. And so when you do a review of all your key processes and your key business activities, all the critical ones, and you put some in the cloud, you need to have a very, very strong incident response policy. Now, that incident response policy is going to be shared between you and the cloud provider with SLAs, with levels of alerts and so on. But at the end of the day, the cloud provider is a third party provider. So the responsibility and the accountability um, remains with you. The operational aspect can be pushed on to the cloud provider, but the accountability is with you. So it's important to have a detailed incident response plan. And in order to have that, you need to say, okay, well, for that critical piece of infrastructure, that critical business activity, these are the types of incidents that would be critical to us. And you need to communicate that to the cloud provider. Now, if they're a good provider, they probably know in advance, but it has to be a real partnership. And it has to be reviewed on an ongoing basis. And of course, it has to be tested. You need to do a test, see if you could do a desktop exercise, or if you can plan a test for disaster recovery and business continuity post-incident with your cloud provider. That's what I would recommend.
Thank you for answering that, Matthew. Our next question is, how to convert denial and anger into acceptance before getting into a depression state?
That's a good question also. Um, I, I think the issue with denial and anger in the cyber in the 5 stages of cyber grief are due to a lack of education and a lack of uh, translating cyber risk and compliance risk into business impact. So on the one hand, you've got board of directors that are with people that have amazing expertise, say in finance, in HR, in something else, but not necessarily in cyber. And they kind of know it's there in the background, but they don't necessarily understand the business impact. They also don't understand that C-level folks and board of directors are always good targets for social engineering attacks. And I have been walked out of boardrooms where, as I said, I'm French, I'm a man, I might be a little bit too direct, but I was one day asked to go and do a presentation to a board of directors of a NASDAQ listed company in the US. And I Googled the board members before I went in, and I was like, these guys just don't know what they're doing. They're clowns. They literally advertising everything they do, where they live, how many children they have. You can see pictures of their cars with their license, with the registration of the car. You can see way too much, and I think that potentially there's a little bit of ignorance at that stage, and it's up to us to educate them. But how do you get their attention? You get their attention by going back to what matters to them. Business disruption. They don't want the business to be disrupted. Um, Putting an asset on an asset value on cybersecurity, suddenly they've got assets that they can actually write off over a few years. That actually they're actually treating cybersecurity as a generic asset, and right now they're not doing that. So I think that the answer to that question is we need to give the board the tools that they need to understand. And so whether it's educating them, doing an exercise as to this is the business impact of not addressing cyber, this is the business impact and the value add of addressing it. And by the way, that will allow us to get more clients and more business and more money and so on. That's the way to do it.
Thank you for your answer. Our next question is how to be cyber resilient in today's world for future attacks, as today's world we see many AI based and other technologies giving rise to new mode of attacks.
Yeah, so AI is an interesting one because AI is actually it's very topical right now because of ChatGPT, but it's not new, and it's not necessarily it's not AI the way you see it as in the movies. A lot of it is still clever machine learning. Now, what's interesting is there are currently about 35 security standards and regulations around AI, like the EU AI Security Act. And we're seeing a parallel between what happened with the cybersecurity industry 20 years ago and what's happening with AI now. So 20 years ago, there was way more security regulation and industry standards than today. They have consolidated, and now the key ones are, generally speaking, PCI, HIPAA, NIS, NIST, and ISO. And I think we're going to see the same with AI moving forward. The question about the evolving threats, I mean, the threats are changing all the time, and they're changing all the time on the one hand because there's new technology like AI, like blockchain, like other stuff, um, or not so new technologies, I was saying, but it's being more in our face as a consumer. But equally, if I look at the topics that I was dealing with when I was delivering a keynote 15 years ago, it's pretty much the same. Malware, phishing, lack of compliance, no program. So at the end of the day, we need to ask ourselves the question, are we moving forward? And the way we need forward is through continuing education. As security professionals, we need to continue to learn all the time, absolutely all the time. So depending on the path you want to take in cyber, you might want to look at threat intelligence. You might want to join some of the public-private partnerships like InfraGard or the Shield, things like that, where law enforcement is working with the private sector, and we learn from each other. Because it's impossible to know all of the threats for one person. That anybody that tells you they know it all is living under a rock. There's no way. It's changing too much. So that also goes back to my point that you need to have a continuous program and you need to map out your ecosystem. Remember that ecosystem I was talking about with the different silos and the different, your hybrid workforce, your workforce at work, like in the office, your cloud applications, your third parties, fourth parties, that changes all the time. So you need to keep an eye on that.
Thank you for answering that. Next question is how can organizations ensure a balance between cybersecurity resilience and operational efficiency in critical infrastructure environment?
Yeah, that's a difficult one because, first of all, I'll give an attorney's answer. It depends on the organization and its maturity level. There's always a trade-off between operational efficiency and security slash compliance. So I often say that if you're a head of risk or a chief security officer, it's a very lonely job because if you do your job correctly, nobody knows your name. You probably have to tell the business that they can't do something that they want to do in order to be more efficient and create more money and so on. And you're seen as the guy who always goes to the board to ask for more money. And if something goes wrong, your head is the first one to roll. So I think that as a chief security officer or as a security person, you need to balance that operational efficiency versus the security risk. At some stage, you may need to take a security risk in order to get some new market or whatever. But you need to. I had a slide on the risk determination process where you have the assets, you have the scope, and you do the risk analysis. You do the risk analysis and you present that to the business and you say, okay, in order for us to allow you to do what you want to do, to get operational efficiency, well, we are going to need to open this up. And if we do that, either you give us money and we can secure it, or you don't and we take a risk that this becomes a critical business activity that is more at risk today than it was yesterday. So it needs to be a discussion. And I think that, the advance of cloud has, and especially cloud services, has meant that a lot of companies like sales and marketing, people in operations, they just go online and they subscribe to a new system and they start sharing the data without asking IT or security for advice or compliance. And then suddenly when we do an audit, we find out we've got all of this new risk surface that is not mapped out. And so it's very, very important when you're thinking about operational efficiency to think about what is the impact going to be on security. Can we add security? Can we add compensating controls? And if that's the case, that's okay. Or are we actually making our critical infrastructure more vulnerable?
Thank you for answering that. Our next question is, how does infrastructure resilience mapped with personal data protection?
How does it map with what? Sorry.
I'll repeat the question. How does infrastructure resilience mapped with personal data protection?
Um, So again, I'm going to give you an attorney's answer. I would probably need a bit more context there, but um, obviously, if you've mapped your ecosystem and if you've mapped your assets and your critical infrastructure assets, and you know the type of data that is used by those assets, or that is either transferred to, transmitted via, or stored or processed on those assets, you will be able to see the privacy impact. So specifically, if you look at GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation in the EU, it will actually ask you to map the data flow on all of the assets, whether the assets are critical or not. But from from a critical infrastructure protection. So yeah, I'm assuming that most people will have heard about NERC and FERC in North America and NIS2 in Europe, and it's all about uh, protecting the critical infrastructure and the data that is on that infrastructure. Another one that you might want to look at to answer that question is DORA, the Digital Operation Resilience Act, specifically for financial services organizations. And that is kind of a link, a bridge between how do I protect my critical infrastructure and comply with data protection or data privacy regulations at the same time.
Thank you for answering that. I'll take last two questions for the day. And the question is, what is security not what it was? Is it because there are fewer technology specialists keeping up with the rapid advancement in the technology?
So I it kind of goes back to one of the previous questions. I think that the issue that we have is we have a lot of new technology that we want to use as business people or private citizens. All of those new technologies capture data and increase the risk surface, either for you as a personal citizen and or for the um, generic society, I guess. So the challenge that we also have is that there's huge pressure on vendors that provide connected devices to go to markets. And because they're going to market really fast, they're bypassing some of the security. So it's not unusual to see a connected device that comes out with very little security options, maybe just the password and that's it. And so one of the issues that we currently have to deal with is this explosion of new devices that are collecting a lot of information, like that Hoover or vacuum cleaner I was talking about, which you would have never thought was collecting private data that could potentially be used to hack into my bank account, hack into my laptop, and from the laptop, hack into my business. And so that's one aspect. The other aspect is the bad guys all collaborate. We as an industry don't collaborate enough. So, I mentioned earlier on the VigiTrust Global Advisory Board. It's a free think tank. We've got 1,350 members from 30 countries, 11 chapters, and we talk about all of those things. It's all security professionals, law enforcement, regulators, and we all come to the conclusion that there's not enough public-private partnership, there's not enough collaboration between the industry and law enforcement, and there's certainly a stigma to sharing what you've done wrong. And I think we're trying to address that at the Global Advisory Board. We thrive on sharing where we didn't perform well, where we had a problem, and how we fixed it, because we expect you to share that too, so that you don't make my mistakes and I don't make yours. And I think that it's challenging. So the answer is we need more cooperation. We need to make sure that vendors build security by design and by default. We need to educate citizens on the value of their data, and we need to make sure that everybody understands that concept of personal critical infrastructure protection. Because my guess is that if somebody protects their data well at home, they'll also apply that at work and vice versa.
Thank you so much, Matthew, for answering that. I'll take the last question for the day, which is, how can organizations ensure a robust cybersecurity resilience strategy for critical infrastructure?
Well, I'm going to go back to the same points. You need to map out that the ecosystem and the infrastructure. You need to classify the critical infrastructure assets. You need to understand the data that flows within that ecosystem, and you need a continuous compliance program. And remember, there's one thing you remember from today is security is a journey, not a destination. And that is especially valid for critical infrastructure. It changes all the time. Cities are more and more connected. Buildings are more and more connected. So you need to map it out. And if I go back to the question about the cloud incident response, you need an incident response plan and you need to test it out. And you need to make sure that you put the right safeguards in place and educate everybody. And also, I would say that if you don't have an ally in the boardroom, and I'm not saying somebody that's going to sign checks for you. I'm saying somebody that will essentially drive a resilience committee or a cybersecurity committee as part of the board and will be your interface with the rest of the IT and compliance people. You're going to have a problem. You really need to to have a sponsor within the board, and not just a financial sponsor. So it's a mix of policy, process, obviously people, obviously technology, but it needs to be done at a strategic level in the boardroom. It needs to be discussed there. If it's not going to work.
Thank you again to our wonderful speaker, Matthew, for answering those questions and for the great presentation and the knowledge shared with our global audience. It was a pleasure to have you with us, and we are looking for more and more sessions with you, Matthew. Before we conclude the webinar, would you like to give a small message to our audience?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's not enough cybersecurity people at the moment. So if you're serious about cyber and you're serious about compliance, you will find a job, no problem. I would highly recommend that you educate yourself on a lot of things. If you're super technical, try and have a little bit of compliance knowledge and data privacy knowledge. If you're super legally minded, you're going to need a little bit of technical knowledge. So you need that blend. You know, and I would highly recommend joining think tanks and joining security associations, because the sooner you do that, the more you build your own network, and we all have to work with each other. And then finally, you know, if you've got any questions or if you'd like to connect, I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn. Don't be cyber strangers. And I wish you the best of luck with continuous education on cyber.
Thank you so much for the message to our audience, Matthew. Before we end the session, I would like to announce our next Cyber Talk session, Ethical Hacking Career Pathways, Navigating Opportunity and Specializations, which is scheduled for 11th of December 2023. This session is an expert presentation by Carl Madsen, who is CISO at No Name Security. To register for this upcoming webinar, please visit our website www.ecouncil.org/cybersecurity-exchange/cybertalks. The link is given in the chat section. Hope to see you all on December 11. With this, we end the session. You may now disconnect your lines. Thank you so much, Matthew.
Thank you very much.